Hello, I'm Elsa Churchill from the Society of Genealogists, and today I want to talk about the importance of putting your ancestors in their place, understanding the communities in which they lived and the historical context of their lives. There are fundamental questions when thinking about family history. Who were they? When did they live? Not only will that enable us to use records appropriate for that period, but we need to know about the contemporary events that might impinge on their lives. Where did they live? We need to know the potential records associated with that place. What do they do? Are there clues to be gleaned from their activities and occupations? Why did that happen? These are perhaps the most difficult questions to answer, and we need their stories to help unravel their history. Using a large-scale ordnance survey or topographical map to plot the places where your ancestors lived is useful. My Herefordshire Churchills seem to move steadily over a period of 200 years down the old Monmouth Road before finally moving across the border into Wales. Not only have they crossed a county boundary, but in this case they've moved to another country. Please don't kid yourselves that your rural ancestors didn't move. They may not have moved far, and they certainly could use a parish church or burial ground convenient to them. Be aware of the size of your parishes. Where did they live in relation to the church? Are there any chapelries outlying in the area? They may wander by foot, by horse and cart, and as transport and communications improve, by post-chaise, canals and trains. My Churchills probably moved for better economic opportunities, as Herefordshire was struggling in the Great Agricultural Depression between the years of about 1873 to 1896, and sometimes all you can find is their final resting place. So follow the trail of your ancestors in the sources relating to where they lived. The Society of Genealogists Library Catalogue will tell you what we hold, for example, for the parish where I live now in Whitstable in Kent. We have church registers and other parish records, facsimiles and transcripts of local records from as early as the 1641 protestation returns to copies of the manorial court documents for the 18th and 19th centuries. We've got maps, of course, and lots of published local histories and a very good run of local trade directories for the 18th to the 20th centuries. So in addition to parish register transcripts, indexes and finding aids or online databases, we do encourage researchers to think beyond the online entry and check the original record. While indexed online, the actual images for the entries for these church registers from Lincolnshire and Herefordshire aren't on the subscription websites, but I've got copies of both here at the Society of Genealogists. In each instance, the clerk has noted an extra nugget or clue that doesn't lend itself well to an online database indexed entry, so we can see how in Spilsby, the Reverend Trollope very frankly describes what he thinks Liddy Day's occupation to be, as she has two children by different fathers baptised on the same day. And in Herefordshire, in St Leonard's, we can see the vicar's gossipy conjecture about the actual father of Susan Smith, baptised in 1828. Um, this is a scandal worthy of note and deserves his 5 exclamation marks as he describes the potential father, who he thinks it is, the wanton preacher, lodging on the family, as the wolf in sheep's clothing. You may need supplementary evidence to local parish registers, and the Society of Genealogists has, for example, monumental inscriptions recorded from local headstones in the churchyard of the parish of Llandinarbo, made by the Herefordshire Family History Society in the 1980s. Amongst these MIs is a note of a decorated headstone, with an inscription enclosed in an oval panel that reads, "In memory of Anne Churchill, buried July 7th, 1716, aged 41. But this burial is not recorded in the published burial registers for the parish of Llandinarbo, nor in the original parish registers or BTs for this or neighbouring parishes, as I've checked the film copies that we hold in the library. So the MI is at the moment the only evidence I have for Anne's death and burial." Genealogists are taught to use the FAN method, i.e. identify family, associates and neighbours. So establish extended family members, siblings, cousins, etc. Gain evidence about those they associated with, such as employers or fellow churchgoers, and of course look at their neighbours. The Churchills and the Vaughans lived next door to each other for about 200 years. In the 1861 census, great-great-grandfather William Churchill Sr. and James Vaughan, a rat catcher, were near neighbours. The 1841 census shows Richard Vaughan, the father of James the rat-catcher, living next door to James and Martha Churchill, parents of William Senior, in Penrose Green in St. Wenards, and other Vaughans and Churchills are noted around the village. The addresses in the censuses are ambiguous, with most of the Aglabs just shown as living in their cottages, but with no indication of street name or anything detailed. The tithe maps and apportionments at the National Archives were compiled in the 1840s, and so are contemporary with the 1841 census, and can supplement with more details and show exactly where the cottage and garden occupied by James Churchill was, and the tenements and gardens occupied by Richard Vaughan and his son Noah. In fact, Noah Vaughan went on to marry James's daughter Martha. I told you the Churchills and the Vaughans were always interconnected. So using large-scale Ordnance Survey maps and tithe maps mean I can identify the exact cottages in Penrose Green when I visited the hamlet of Broad Oak in St. Wenards in Herefordshire a few years ago. James and Martha Churchill lived on the cottage on the right, and the Vaughans lived on the left. Here's my great-great-grandfather, William Churchill Senior, second from bottom, showing listed in the electoral rolls for 1885-6 that he's eligible to vote in St. Wenards because of the 1884 Act, which opened the franchise to more male householders in rural communities. He's shown living in his dwelling house at Chapel Row, and the house still stands today, though considered more comfortable than it was in the 1880s. The current owner virtually rebuilt it and thinks animals were housed downstairs and the family lived above. The electoral rolls in this instance give more information about the address than the census does. In 1881 and 1891, William is just shown as living in the hamlet of Broad Oak in St. Wenards, but that no house name or street is indicated, unlike the electoral rolls. Now, Thomas, the elder son of James and Martha Churchill, and the older brother of William Senior, was shown as receiving outdoor relief from the district of St. Wenards, which was part of the Ross Poor Law Union, for the period in the half-year April to September 1866. This Thomas Churchill of Cloudie, in the parish of Llangaran, was aged 68 and a receipt of weekly relief of 1 shilling and £6 bread, having received £6, 3 shillings and sixpence during the half-year, but is noted as having died in 1866. Because I can identify Anne Churchill, the daughter of Thomas Churchill, the pauper, as of Llangaran, I can work out her rather complicated sets of relationships, as indicated by her entry in the 1871 census. I found an affiliation order in 1858 that was reported in the newspaper against James Morris of St. Wenards to get him to pay 1 shillings and sixpence to support the illegitimate child of Anne Churchill of Llangaran. I think she had 2 children by James Morris, Charles Morris Churchill, that's a clue, and another William Churchill. She then married James Davies and had 2 more children, Jane and James Davies, and after his death, I think the widow Anne married the younger brother of James Morris, called William, and had 2 more children with William. And there we can see the family in the 1881 census. And again, the stepchildren described, and I've sorted out the parentage of that because I knew that she was Anne of Llangaran. Turning to a separate Morris family, this time in Kent, we find William Morris was the base-born child of Mary Morris, baptised on 3rd of May 1779 in Staplehurst. And here we see an order made against William Bridge, or Bridges, it's not clear, a husbandman late of Frittenden, which is the neighbouring parish, who'd been named as the father of the bastard child when Mary Morris was examined before the JPs. It would appear that William was unable to support the child and wasn't willing to marry Mary, and had tried to escape his responsibilities by signing up for the militia. He was deemed a burden on the parish, and they sought to remove him and establish his place of settlement. The settlement examination of William Bridge, a militiaman in the Sussex Regiment of Militia, taken upon the 4th of February 1779, shows that the local JPs were anxious to prove his parish a settlement. Where could they legally send him? Well, William's account of himself shows he had moved about considerably. He was born in Childridge in Essex. He worked in Frittenden for a year and had done nothing else to gain a settlement within elsewhere other than Frittenden. So all the clues we need to take his history further are indicated by the places he mentions in this examination. Putting our ancestors in their place is fundamental to understanding their story. And there are possible Essex baptisms indexed on Find My Past that are worth following up. I think the baptisms of William Bridge in 1776, the son of Matthew and Catherine at Mount Nessing, and William Bridges 1767, the son of Samuel and Anne at Romford in St. the confessors are rather early, as it's unlikely he's fathering a child aged around 11 or 12, unless these are late baptisms, of course. But the entry for William Bridge in 1755, the son of Thomas and Anne at Mount Nessing, is interesting, and Childridge is equidistant between the two parishes of Mount Nessing and Romford. John Pantry, when asked by the Canterbury Consistory Church Court to give information about his name, age, and where he was from, and how long he'd lived there, tells his story of where he was for the first 25 years of his life. He didn't go far, but he certainly ranged, and his life seemed to have gone up and down the M20. He said that he was a smith, a husbandman, and was born in Newchurch. And he's been in all sorts of places, at Stouting for 2 years, at Lyminge, at Sevington for 6 months, in Dymchurch for 3 months, at Elam for 16 weeks, at Kensington, which I think is probably more likely to be Kennington, Elmstead, Newchurch, and all of these places. And I am delighted that I have a source that finally puts him in his place. So I wish you luck with doing the same for your ancestors.